Okay, good morning, Mark, and everyone that part of the world, and good afternoon or good evening, everyone in Europe, or even good evening, good night, good day for everyone. Welcome to this webinar with Mark Cashman, Senior Product Manager at Microsoft. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Before we jumping on to Mark's presentation, I would like to share some logistics information about this webinar. After this very short introduction, Mark is going to demonstrate and present his presentation and going to do some demos. After that, we are going to have some discussions and Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions. We have already received some, and we are still open for more questions at any time during the webinar. We are going to answer those in the end. This webinar is being recorded, so you should check your inbox later this week. I'm going to share you the URL of the recording, and you can see it later at any time. If you have any feedback issues with the logistics, with the technology, with Zoom or whatever, there is a chat window down in Zoom. So feel free to ask me there. I am going to be here in the background while Mark is presenting. So I hope everything goes well. But if not, just please let me know in the chat window. If you do have any questions to Mark during the presentation, there is a Q&A button again down in Zoom. So click there, enter your question, and we will make sure that Mark is answering your question in the end of this webinar. And please follow us on Twitter, and if you like this webinar, share it. If you have any feedback, again, feel free to let us know. With that, Mark, I'm going to let you share your screen, and everyone please enjoy Mark Cashman's webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and thank you everybody for joining this morning. The topic that we have here, just so you know you landed in the right webinar, is to learn about the power and intelligence of search and discovery, and really to understand what it is and what does that look like, what does it mean, how does it work, and how does that really appear throughout Office 365. My name is Mark Cashman. I'm on the Microsoft team that focuses on what we're doing with search and discovery in Office 365. I sit on the SharePoint side of things, but I work with the team in Oslo that builds Delve, owns the Microsoft Graph, and really trying to focus on what it is that we're doing across your explicit search and really the beauty of discovery when you're finding and discovering content that's happening around you. That's really the value. And so I was really honored to be invited by Agnes and to be here this morning. And we got a lot to share, so I'm really just going to start plugging through so that you can get a lot of concepts, be very aware of where and how the graph is used, and also to show you it working and make sure that we answer your questions at the end. So as a category, certainly the beauty of what's happening behind the scenes is something we call the Microsoft Graph. But it really fits into if you are aware or becoming aware of what's happening in the space of artificial intelligence, this is really where this resides. This is machine learning on the back end that is really helping us do a lot of things. And hopefully you will see that by the end of the session. And you'll understand, obviously, how we're working with it and what you're contributing to it as a tenant, as a user in the system, and how that makes it better over time. But some of the important things are just to be very aware of how it works, be aware of how we're building it, and really we want to put forth these tenets that really across all of Microsoft are how are we leveraging artificial intelligence? Are we making sure that it actually helps you, that it's a good feature, that it's functional, that it doesn't slow you down? We want to be transparent in how it works. We want to make sure that whatever we do, you're aware of in terms of how we write and build the algorithms and the experience that we intend, but also how we adhere to permissions and don't break any privacy. And it's really a testament to how it's being built. It's also a level of trust that we know you put in us, And we have a high confidence in the level of trust already with Office 365, and we promote and expose and are transparent everywhere. And we want to carry that through to questions and maybe initial perceptions that people have of how we're leveraging artificial intelligence. We want to make sure that you understand the way that we build it is actually in your best interest, not only to make you more productive, but of course not to overexpose and to break any permissions or privacy settings that you have set. And one thing I like to call out here is if you are a science fiction fan and you know Isaac Asimov, way back he talked about the 3 rules of robotics. And essentially the key is no robot will do any human harm. And it really is something that we're carrying forth here in artificial intelligence to ensure that it only helps you, doesn't harm you. So where it fits in the realm of what we're doing to reinvent productivity, we're doing a lot in the space of collaboration. That's a lot of what Office really has historically focused on. And over the years, of course, has been improved in terms of how you can create content, how you can work with others, how you can find content, and really adding to that now this level and layer of intelligence so that you not only have to go seek and find, but maybe things come to find you. And they really will find you when you are collaborating with others, when you're working alone. If you're working on a document, if you're working on a presentation, if you're working on a deadline and you're working on making sure that all of the information about a customer is intact and it's been checked so that you can move forward with your proposal. And of course, all of us are more on the go. Devices these days are incredible, and I think the Office division has really tapped into it in the last few years to really enable everything that you want to do, not just to view, but to edit, not just to look for, but actually discover, and have that all be available to you while you're on the go across all levels of devices and platforms. And of course, whether you're on your PC, Mac, whether you're on your Android, iOS, or Windows, that everything will be at the level of trust, big screen down to the small screen. And trust here is really your data is in a safe and secure environment, but you're able to access it and not have it feel locked in just because it's in an enterprise scenario setting. And the reality is, of course, we're surrounded and ensconced by data. Data could be something as simple as a piece of information that you filled out in a form and submitted a number of weeks ago, to a document or a proposal that you're working on in a sales scenario, all the way through to something that's more project-oriented, timelines, promotions, big internal campaigns and whatnot. And we're just surrounded by it. And sometimes it's a good thing. There's a lot that everybody's working on, and that means we have a huge corpus of what we can tap into. But it also means that sometimes it's hard to find the right piece of content, and equally hard to find the right person if you're looking for a specific set of expertise. So if you map this plethora of data, which is growing, month over month, year over year, and specific to this space, it's growing to the extent of, if you look at our search index, and this is an Office 365 metric, it's growing at about 10% month over month, which just means it's fresh, it's growing, and there's a lot of content out there that we're, of course, on your behalf, crawling and indexing. So we bring in that layer of machine learning so that as people are starting to collaborate with other people, work on projects on their own, dive into different experiences, whether it's through the web, through their client applications, through custom environments that people have built for them, they are actually able to weed through the things that aren't important to them. And I think that's one of the most important things. It's to them. It's that area of personalization. There's a lot of important content throughout the entire enterprise, but how do you get to what's the most insightful thing for you to accomplish a task, to find the right person faster, and sometimes before you go looking for it, to be promoted right there, right in context of where you're working, so that you can get your work done, but also discover some elements that are happening around you in a way that maybe you haven't ever before. So if you think about this entity that we have, and we're growing on your behalf in every tenant in Office 365, there's the Microsoft graph, and there's the business use side of it, and there's the developer side of it, and I'll cover both here. But it really is an entity that's learning about you, what you do, and who you work with, what you work on, what you share, emails that you read, and which ones you do or don't reply to. They're all signals into this graph that tells us a lot more about you. And I'll repeat it a couple times, but of course it's not breaking any privacy. We don't do anything with that information except for promote to you the next best person or next best content based on what we know about those social relationships at work. So then it gives you those capabilities to basically pull the intelligence out of the graph so that your searches become more concrete and hopefully quicker. There's an element of discovery. You'll see a lot of that coming up in slides and demo. And that you get a concept of being notified so that if something's happening that you maybe aren't directly aware of or aren't aware of yet, that you'll be brought into that environment, brought into that document, invited essentially to meet that person virtually, and having that be more automated, sometimes building against actual workflow and process, but also just having that be, where are you working? Where do you start your day? And having that be something that then you might want to then specifically track and manage certain things. So this comes through a number of different layers and experiences. So we think about this as surfacing intelligent, primarily in context with where you are, but also building some new experiences. One of the big ones that we've built, which is a very new experience called Delve. And Delve is really a primary example and a great place to go to discover people and content. But we have intelligence in applications within the content that you're working on. Obviously, from an assistance perspective, you think of this realm of bots that are now coming. We have a bot that we've built. We have a bot framework that you can build your own bots. And it's very simple to build a bot that actually queries the Microsoft Graph to pull out relevant information that you program in your experience. And of course, that leads into the extensibility of the Graph API. And that's a lot about how we build against the graph and provide these new experiences. And there's that same level of public access so that you also can build your custom experiences. But where it really hits, and I think where you really see throughout the presentation, is what does it actually empower the user, you, to do, or on behalf of wanting to actually invest or buy into this at a broader company level, what are people going to be able to do based on this intelligence? And of course, they'll be able to find what they need. There's a concept of getting back to your work, what I have most recently done. The graph is a very fresh look at what you've done in addition to other people that you've recently worked with. You know what's happening around you. Think of all the feeds that your eyeballs hit on a daily basis: Twitter, Facebook, work, email. And not to see it as an overload, but really to see if you can get a very targeted view of what's happening around you, you'll be able to focus as what you do. You'll see how other people are focusing and prioritizing and map to what they're doing, or maybe stop doing what you were just about to do because you know it's covered. And you can see how people are working together. And in a collaborative space, being more aware, being more informed only has benefits for how you work together. I think one of the most important attributes of a really solid collaboration pattern and practice is not only to be able to contribute to the collaboration and to provide from what you do, the work that you do, but to be able to leverage other people's work. And that's really where, if you map some of these together, if you go looking for things and you find it, that's great. If it comes looking for you and you find value in what you've discovered and are able to then leverage it and build off of that, you're going to save a lot of time. Sometimes just giving that person a kudo or a thank you will really benefit the value of what they know they're putting into the system, and everybody will then benefit. And the sort of last mile thing is that when you're working in these types of environments, there's an aspect of working out loud, which might be giving you a channel of communication that you didn't have to actually share your work, to actually amplify what you're doing. So if you take a lot of those concepts, one view on what is this thing that we call the Microsoft Graph. So as you're working in the environment and you're sharing documents, you're meeting with different people, you're joining different groups, and those people, of course, are doing all of their tasks and activities, you start to get a blend of what's happening around me, and you start to get a sense of what is actually the graph doing. It's tracking all of these activities. And if you think about it, in the past, we log all this data in enterprise logs. We have a search index that certainly tracks where this content is and how to access it. And if you add on top of that this layer of intelligence, that's just telling basically the relationships between these pieces of content, these different groups and people. And we bring that together and provide value off of that, so that then this powers both that discovery and expertise discovery, being a person discovery, throughout Office 365. And I'm just going to whip through a couple examples here and then really jump into demo so you can see it in action. But if you look at Delve, Delve is purely derived off of the graph to show you a feed of content of what's happening around you, both people and content, and have different pivots so that you can go in and learn based on people that you sort of track and follow, or as you read a piece of content that's informing the graph that it's of something of interest to you. And so the delve experience will be fluid and ever-changing. There's obviously search, one of the announcements that I'll call out at the end, which is really what we're starting to roll out is we've always had search. Enterprise search is growing. There is the Enterprise Search Center. If you've ever used one or built one, that's not going away. But adding to that are some of these new in-app search experiences, which really are more discovery. When you go to type in a keyword, the result set that you get is based on the graph information that we know about who you work with, what they work on, and based on what you're looking for, will get you closer to what's most important based on that center of gravity of those people that you work with and the content that you work on. Another way to learn through people in context with when you're in different areas of Office 365. If I'm in a document library and I read a document that I found interesting or helpful, I can actually hover over the person who last modified it or the person who owns it, and I can see more about them right there in context with where I'm working. We call those people cards. And the people cards are like a little mini Office 365 just for that person that you're looking up that's of interest to you. So you can see who they work with. You can see the content that they're working on there in that environment. That might just be a team site, or it might be their OneDrive for Business. But you can also scope it right in the card without leaving the card to see all the content that they're working on. And here is another time I'll call out, anything I see on somebody's people card will only be content that I have permissions or access to see. It may be something that they're working on in a group that I also belong to, or it's just been openly shared with everyone, and its intent is for everybody to be able to discover it. So if you go from the concepts of delve and really what is the graph inside OneDrive for Business? There's a number of tabs that you can click into to see your explicit files. You can see things that are shared with you or recent. All of those are coming either off of the search index or as we get to the discover level are actually coming from the graph so that I can see in the context of me working on files or wanting to find or manage files, I'm seeing the Discover engine show me files that might be of interest to me, and I will see that through the lens of just files. For when I turn to the SharePoint home page, which if I click on the SharePoint tile and I go to the SharePoint home page in Office 365, I'm going to see really through the lens of all my sites and portals that I interact with. Which ones are the most frequent? What are the activities that I am seeing from inside those individual sites? And of course, a real powerful thing that suggests sites to you based on the different sites that you visited, the different people that you work with. And a lot of these experiences being pulled from the graph and programmed in a way to give you a really targeted lens of what's happening in sites that you are frequenting or active in. And based on those actions, what other sites might we be able to promote to you? So I mentioned bots in the very front. If you look at what we're doing with Microsoft Teams, it brings together a chat experience that then you can pull in documents from SharePoint. You can pull in a plan from Planner, and you really have it based around the chat, be able to reference those different content types. When you want to pull in somebody into a chat or you're looking for somebody in particular, the Who bot that we have in Microsoft Teams that when it goes to general availability will be available to you is actually a simple query, but a very powerful query that goes into the graph and says, if you ask it a simple question, who is Mark Cashman? And it'll bring back, like you see here for Ben Walters, a people card. And it really gives you a little bit more information, and you can click around and find out more about Ben. But I can also say who in the Eastern Washington focuses on SharePoint sales. Not a name, but more of a topic. And I can then find that. And that will, the Who bot will still query the graph and do its best to find the most relevant person from the Active Directory, the global address list, and based on my sphere of the graph, be able to present that person to me and then also present a people card. If I go into something like Office 365 Video, or in the future when this becomes de facto the new experience of Microsoft Stream, the experience here is that you get to see videos trending around you. So querying the graph to say, what's the most important video that I can show to Mark when he's on this page? Or based on the video that Mark just watched, what's the best next video that we can promote to him based on the other videos that people around him are watching? And of course, map it to the topic so that it's relevant based on both people and the content itself. A really important one for all of us, I think, and I'll speak mostly on everybody's behalf here for a second. As you're weeding through email, your inbox is as full as it is and is ever growing. And of course, it's a working environment where you're responding to email, learning what other people are doing, or getting the feedback that you asked for. And to have this be a much more targeted experience to really show you the email that matters most to you based on learned behavior of the graph, learning which important emails do you reply to quickly, which ones are based on groups that you're active in, so maybe bubble up that into your visible space, but also fade into the background some emails maybe that historically you haven't engaged on, so we won't show you those. And so leveraging the graph here, we have a feature called the focused inbox. And there's been a lot of great feedback on how that's helped people really get through their email, get through their inbox, and really focus on the things that are most important. And then one thing that's just fun to see that you haven't, if you maybe haven't seen it, is a new feature in Word called Tap. And this really helps you in the context of building a proposal, a white paper, a blog post, whatever you might be building in Word, keeping in Word the ability to query the graph, find additional content that you maybe want to pull into your existing content, and doing that all within the frame of Microsoft Word and not having to switch context or go somewhere, find it, open it, copy, paste, put it in. It really is an in-place search engine that's got the level of intelligence to help you discover content and then take that next step of actually being able to include it. So if you take all of those, that's a pretty wide look at what intelligence is coming into your user experience across a different range of offerings. And so I'm going to step through some of what you saw and give a little bit more depth, and hopefully you can see my here. I'm going to walk through a lot of what we just talked about, but to see if you're logged in today, and just to be very clear, this is actually all running today in production. So maybe things that you've seen, maybe some things that you haven't yet clicked into, or if you're not an Office 365 customer just yet, we hope that you'll see this and understand what it is that we're building to hope to provide more value to make you and your peers more productive. So just to orient yourself to where I'm at, I'm in Delve, and if you're in Office 365, whether you started in the portal, whether you started in email, regardless of where you're at, you're able to open up the app launcher, and you are able to click then on Delve, which is clicking on the Delve tile. And so that's where I'm at. I'm on my home page, and everything I see as I scroll up and down is content that's happening around me based on people that I work with, people that I've engaged with, things that are popular based on maybe documents in a group, and a lot of people in that group are viewing them or sharing them and getting value out of them. And you get a sense of, on each card, why am I seeing this? This one I'm seeing because it's trending. This one I'm seeing because I work with Ruben, and he last modified this, and it's a document that's maybe in an open zone where we both are working, and because he last modified it, maybe is something that will be of interest to me. I can click mark it and save it as a favorite so I can get back to it, and I can do things like, if I wanted to add more context to this document, I can say sales motion and just add that as a keyword, and that will start to create what we call boards, which is just a collection of assets that are tagged with the same tag. And so you can see here now this board is showing up, and by me doing that, I'm adding more information into the graph to say, here's another way to describe this piece of content. Me actually taking action on it means I've found some value in it, so other people maybe around me will find additional value. And the more action that you take on content, the more you share it, the more that you send it as a link, the more that maybe you post it into a group chat, will actually then lend itself to become more of a valued piece of content that will, for other people, start trending into their view, into their Delve feed. If I go into then somebody else's view, if I go into maybe my manager Dan's profile, the profile information obviously is pretty straightforward. It's coming from Active Directory, and this is how I can contact Dan. On the left, I can see whether he's free or busy in his calendar, and I get a lot of specific information about Dan that he's either entered in or has been entered on his behalf based on now where he sits here in Microsoft. But I can now also see how I can learn through Dan. I can see documents that he's been working on. Again, the caveat here is I won't see anything that anybody's working on if they haven't given me any permissions to see the content. But because Dan's my manager, or Dan has put content in an open working environment in terms of open group that I belong to, I can see that. I can click in and see all the content that I have access to that Dan is working on, and I'll be able to see that in a very fresh view based on what he's working on very, very currently. I can also get a view of who Dan works with. Some of these people I might know because we're on the same team. Some people I may not know because Dan works with other people that maybe I don't come in contact with quite as much from a work perspective. And I can see that list of people that are working with Dan. And as I scroll down, where I think the real value and maybe kind of the eye-opener if you're new to this space is because I know Dan, and because Dan obviously works with a sphere of people that the graph is aware of, and as that changes over time, so too with this list, I now can see all the content from the people that work with Dan, and I can get a glimpse into what's happening around them and learn who Dan works with, see what they're working on, and still maintain that value of not being able to see things that I don't have permissions. So I'm not getting exposed to something that I shouldn't see here. I'm only seeing content that is really intended to be visible by a lot of people, or at least visible to people that know Dan that, you know, are maybe 1 or 2 degrees of separation from him. So if I go into another environment in Office 365, which again, just to orient you where I am at now, if I go into the app launcher and I click on the SharePoint tile, that'll take me to what we call the SharePoint Home in Office 365. And I'm seeing that same value of what have I done most recently and what are other people around me doing in this environment, and tailor that to me. And I'll kind of point to here in the upper right, I'm always logged in as Mark, or you are always logged in as you. So I'm going to have a very personalized experience. I had a personalized experience in Delve. I have a personalized experience because it's going to then track the frequent sites that I go to. Or even if I'm not active in the site, but I frequent it, I will see what's happening, and I'll see the actual site activities that come directly off the graph. And these are the activities that are relevant to Mark that are happening in that site. And there's always that mix. There might be a lot happening in a site, but what's relevant to Mark is really the ordering of what we then present to you in this user interface. And as you can see, there's a lot of activity, and I will see a glimpse. If I click into the site itself, I'll actually see the full site of site activities, and I might even be able to learn why I saw some versus other. And at the very bottom here, alongside some of the proactive measures I'm taking on sites and portals, ones that I follow, things that I frequent, I'm now starting to become suggested. Sites are becoming suggested to me. And so this is based on sites that I visited, people that I work with. These might be sites that they're active in that I haven't yet visited, or they might be purely presented to me because I seem to be interested in certain topics. And so I will see those appear here. I can choose if I wanted to, if this one looked interesting and I want to save it for later, or start to follow it so I can learn more, and more information from that site will come into my feed. I click follow. It's now here as a new followed site. But remember, it's not just here in my user interface. It's also a signal into the graph to say that site is of interest to me. And the more I do into it, the stronger those signals will get. And hopefully you get that concept of the more active I'm in that site, the more value I'm going to derive from it, and then that will be shared through me because the graph is then going to showcase that to other people who are closely related to me. Switching into another scenario, another use case when I'm working with my files, again to orient where I'm at is if I was into the app launcher and I clicked into my OneDrive for Business, the first thing that I get when I go to OneDrive are all of my files that I'm managing and managing closely. These are physically the files that follow me wherever I go because they sync on my PC at work and home. They travel with me through my app that I have. But even in the app and in the web experience here, I'm starting to see pivots based on search. So here's a pivot off of search index that are all the recent files that I've accessed. This will actually become something that's more relevant because not only is it a recent document, but maybe there's been that activity that other people have worked on. So that sphere of who I work with and what they work on will become more intelligent. With the shared with me pivot, it's just that. It's a query into the graph that tells me what has been shared with me. So there's an element of what's been shared with Mark, and then really just an order of time. But where we really start to see what we're talking about is that intelligence. If I'm in OneDrive for Business, we make the assumption from how we program it that you're working on files, whether that's to view files, to edit them, to discover files both from OneDrive for Business or in SharePoint Online document libraries. You have access to get to all those files, and we're tracking all of those activities so that your personal graph becomes more personalized when we provide it through the lens of here is a way to discover relevant items or relevant files. And if you look at the difference between this and the Delve feed that we looked at, Delve will show me more than files. I might see videos. I might see pages that people created in SharePoint. Here I'm just looking at through a lens of documents, not just Office documents. These could be PDFs. These could be different file types. But as you see here, this is giving me a tight lens on what files might be of interest to me. And this is where I can turn to when I'm in OneDrive for Business and discover more files happening around me. So one of the things that we talked about is we talked about those people cards. So I'm here now in a SharePoint team site. I may have come from the SharePoint Home and clicked into the loyalty program card, or I may have this bookmarked and I'll go right to it. But as I click into one component of a team site is the document library. And as this loads up, I want to really show you not only can you get a lot of information off of the content itself, you can see how you can best organize and promote things when people are actually in the document library itself. But as if I scroll down, and we talked about my manager, Dan, and we saw his specific profile. And so if I hover over Dan's name here, you're going to see a people card appear. And so as it comes through, right in context with where I'm working, I can learn a little bit more about Dan. Now, the scenario of Dan, he's my manager. I should know who he works with and what he works on. But if I'm discovering somebody else, I can hover over Adam here, and I can learn more about Adam. And so I can see who he reports to. I can click into, staying within the context of the card, who Adam reports to and see the report chain there. But I can also click in to see what documents first in this site collection or in this team site. These are all the documents that Adam has been active on. I can hover over them and get kind of a visual cue on those and take certain actions. If I want to open it, start to work with that document, I can. If I want to expand the scope, again, staying within the people card, I can actually do a little mini query that goes and says, what content has Adam most recently accessed? The graph then shows me that based on what I have permissions to see. We'll then filter it down and trim it so that based on those permissions, here's all the content that I'd be able to see that Adam's working on. And so for me, the scenario is I see Adam's been doing some good work. I'd like to learn more about Adam. And in fact, I might want to see more of about what he's doing. And as you can see here, this top one is actually a great example of another piece of content, not just a document, but this one is actually a SharePoint page, and you can see the SharePoint icon that's represented right there. And it really gives you a sense of what is the content, how old is it, or when was it created, and of course, who is it created by, and I can learn a lot more about them. So I'm going to click into Adam's profile, but really just as an excuse to get you to see that I want to talk about the value of your own profile. So in the context of reviewing more about Adam, maybe I wanted to see more about him more than the people card, I can always commit to the profile. But really, and this is a personal use case for me, I've actually set my personal profile in Office 365 to be my start page for where I begin my day. And in a demo context, I'm going to go and show you how you can get there by just clicking on your image in the upper right, click the About Me, and this will take you to your personal profile. Now, it might not be so interesting to realize, where does Mark sit? I know where I sit. I know where I'm sitting right now. And I know exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm working with Agnes, and pretty soon I'm going to about to be in the learning mode when Agnes starts to help with questions. So I know where I'm at. The important part here is in your profile, you can actually get back to your content. And the difference here is of course, you're going to see content that has maybe not been yet shared because it's private. And you can get the sense that we show you, this is a private document. Only you are seeing this. And I can, of course, jump back to something that I most recently did. The graph is very fresh. The search index, of course, is also very fresh. And I can jump right back into where I was working, even if I was working in an environment that I maybe don't closely manage day to day. But because somebody sent me a share from their OneDrive for Business, I made a modification. I wanted to come back and check something. Quickest way for me to get back there is through my profile, and really because of the power of the graph. And it's also a way for me, if I wanted to get kind of a filtered view based on the people that I work most closely with, that's this row of people, I can jump in and kind of get a mini Delve view based on just those people. And as I click into See All, I'll grow that sphere and be able to see that a little bit more closely. So two more examples from a demo perspective, and then we'll jump through a few more concepts slide-wise. Is in the context of mail, I'm going to go in and see email that I had sent just for demo purposes that's got a lot of people on it. So I want to actually learn a lot from different people. And I want to make sure that I click on the right one. So we'll see in the header, obviously a lot of different people are a part of this email, and the way that the Outlook team is building against the graph and using the concept of a people card is they are bringing through that information directly in the user interface of Outlook. And if this one doesn't load up here, we'll click around to a different one. See if we can refresh this page. If not, I will move on. But the context here is if I were to see somebody's name, I can click on their face, on their name, and on the right-hand side will open up a panel that will tell me a lot more about them, just like the people card that I showed you. And it looks like we're hopefully not hitting too many connection errors, but I'll try one more click to get this email loaded up. If not, trust me, there's a really nice people pane that pops up, and I can really learn about somebody. And in the context, before I reply all and I start to share my information or my insight, I can learn a little bit about the people that are there on that page. So let me minimize that, and I'll show you one last, from a demo perspective, one last thing. So here is the tap feature. I'm in Microsoft Word, and I clicked on Insert, and there's this new item, this new button called Document Item, which is what we call tap. It opens up a pane on the right-hand side, and if I scroll down, the context here is I'm working on a blog post, and this is something that we did just post earlier in the week, and is really contextual here because it talks about powering intelligence, powering search in an intelligent way. And in the context of this blog post, I know I wanted this image that I wanted to put in here, and I know I had it in something that I worked on recently. So I'm going to type in a keyword that will help me refine that, intelligence, and I'll click Find. This is going to send a query to the Microsoft Graph and pull out everything that's relevant to me based on the keyword of intelligence. And here I can find, here's actually the presentation that I was working on that I know that graph is inside. So I'm going to click into that, and I'll scroll down, and you can see this is the presentation that we were just working on. And here's that image that I wanted. I wanted to get this sort of business representation of the graph itself. So through the power of the graph, I can find the content I'm looking for. I found the actual image that I wanted to use. I'm going to click here and then click Add Picture to actually add that right where I want into my document. I'm going to save that, and then that will then be something that's available to me to then keep working on. But I stayed in context with where I was working on the content, and already now I can get the value of not having to hunt around for it, that I could find it very, very quickly right where I was working, right in context with what I was doing. So sorry my one demo didn't work, but pretty good percentage for demo experience. I did want to go into a few more slides, and these will go pretty quickly because I think we've got a lot of context with what we've been seeing. I've said it a couple of times in terms of how we track and manage content is certainly bound to all the security and privacy and all of the compliance measures that we take in Office 365. None of the data or the graph itself lives in an environment that would break any security or privacy settings that we promote or that you yourself set on that content. So again, users will only discover content that they have permissions to see. There is a level at the tenant level to be able to opt out of the graph, which really means your users won't have access to everything that I just showed you. They won't necessarily have a big red X, and it won't be a terrible experience, but they won't have that intelligence-based experience. So you can opt out everybody in your tenant. Individuals, if you have the whole tenant opted in, individuals can still opt out. So it is a per-user experience. If they want to opt out, they can do that through the Delve interface. There's a pretty simple way to opt out. They can always opt back in. And there's even a method if you wanted to do a pilot where you can opt everybody out and then run a PowerShell script that opts in your pilot group and then re-opts everybody in once you've committed to the graph. But if you think about the graph growing, and of course you and your content growing within Office 365, there's always the concept and the reality that the data is yours, which means the graph data that we track and manage and grow for you is also yours. And so there's nothing in the bounds of we trap and keep your data and it's inaccessible to you. In fact, it is only your data. It is not Microsoft's data. We just happen to build an experience around that data and store it on your behalf in a safe, secure way. It also level of what we call a Tier D, which is something we've recently accomplished in the last 6 months, but really have been working towards so that we can map to the highest level of compliance that we can offer in Office 365 with all of the built-in security and all of the security measures that you can then lend to that. You can then certainly reach that level of security and feel safe in terms of how you share your content. Very quickly, we certainly wanted to touch on that if you're in a split deployment where you have content on premises and content online, we have, of course, configuration in place that helps you create a connection between on-premises and online and have a unified search index, which then, of course, we build on top of to be able to provide discovery engine so that your smart, intelligent experiences could also pull through content that may still live on premises. So this gives you a way to keep your applications and your content that you want to keep on premises intact, but a way to connect them and bring them into the experience of maybe where more and more people are working, and of course expose that content even if it's on premises through a discovery motion. And so you can of course connect that up with SharePoint 2013 or much easier to do with SharePoint 2016. And it's a wizard where you go through and you configure it from an IT motion. And as an end user, then you have a unified search experience both in your search center, which is what you're seeing here, and that's pulling off of the graph, or explicitly here just pulling off of the search index itself. But if you then look at what we talked about with Delve, Delve also is built on top of the search index, and with that layer of intelligence is showing you all the content that's trending around you based on who's logged in that might also include on-premises content. So it really is a powerful way. If you look at it from a really simplified architecture view, you've got all of your content, either in Office 365, on-premises, or of course the combination of the two. We unify that in the search index so you can see then content is then indexed across 365 and in on-premises in a unified index that's stored in Office 365. The graph itself is Office 365 only, but can have awareness because it's crawling and looking at not just your behaviors of who you work with and what you work on, but the whole content, the whole corpus of content in whatever we know and can track in the search index itself. We then build on top of that user experiences that are in Office 365, like you saw me demo, or are also custom applications that you are building for web, for mobile, or running wherever it might be running in on-premises. And those unique experiences that you're building really work through all these layers to expose the content in smart ways, and of course is fresh because of the graph itself is fresh, the search indexes itself is fresh, and whether you're in our user experience and going and looking for something, or you're discovering it because it's coming to you, it's a two-way motion that really builds and enhances on the value of how this works. So two last things, and then we'll turn it over to Agnes, and then we'll walk through questions. Is we have two real quick examples of customers that we have. One is a company in Germany that's been leveraging Delve for a while, and really they saw the value of Delve and wanted to take the next step and build a custom experience in their custom intranet portal and have that be a graph experience that's pulling through information so that their colleagues, when you sign in, are exposed to more of what other people are doing in a way that comes through on the portal. And so they're working across about 50 countries, and everybody has a unique experience when they log into that portal. In the UK, we've got Marks & Spencer that's really been leveraging Delve from a people perspective. And as they've got people on different sales opportunities that are about 80,000 people across the world, they have a lot of information that's coming through, and they really want to have a best practice of how you can find somebody very quickly based on what you're doing and derive value off of them and get that quickest time to market. So through these two customers, hopefully you see a lot of value that they're getting out of Delve as a prime example, but that they're taking those next level steps to treat it as more of a either people portal or in the portals themselves to be able to build a custom experience. And lastly, I'll leave this here as we turn to questions. This is what we recently announced, and really what I wanted to show in Delve, if we had time, is that new search experience to show you what it is intelligence search looks like. But I'll pause here and turn to questions so we don't run out of time, and turn it to you, Agnes, and kind of queue up what questions have been coming in that we want to kind of focus on.
Thank you, Mark. This is amazing. I mean, thank you very much. It's been a very exciting content. And we've got so many questions by email, by Q&A here. I've been trying to kind of normalize them because some of them are very same, or at least very, very similar. I think the most important one and the most common question is which has been submitted by several people. One of them is this: search boxes are still critical to users. One of the biggest confusion with Office 365 search is just how many search boxes there are. Is there a list of which boxes search what content? Yammer versus Teams versus OneDrive for Business, Dev, SharePoint Online Groups, Outlook, etc., etc. Users are confused which search box will get them the content they want.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there certainly are a lot of search boxes, and I think that the intent is that when you're in an environment working, the context is you don't want to leave your work, and that's at least how we're building it. So in the context of working in Outlook, primarily when you do a search in Outlook, you will get refinement on emails that you're looking for, or maybe based on content, obviously, that's been as an email attachment, or because one of the new things that we announced this week was in the graph, we also now have awareness of files that are been attached in a modern way. So it's really stored in the right location, but referenced in the email. So from that perspective, I'm in Outlook and I'm looking and searching for content primarily email oriented. If I turn to OneDrive for Business, the pivot of files, we're trying to understand that workload as a place where you work on your files. And so a search from OneDrive today would be a pivot on looking for files first, the ones that are within your OneDrive for Business, and then you can commit to a broader search to look across more files, maybe files that are in other people's OneDrive for Business or throughout group files and stored in other locations throughout SharePoint Online. But I think really the answer to your question is, will we start to normalize this experience in ways like we're building now in Delve? And if you can kind of derive what you see on the screen here, when I perform a search in Delve, my first click gets me to the work that I've most recently done. So it's a way for me to quickly get back to what I was working on based on the graph, but really as a pivot on here are people that you've recently worked with, or here's content that you've recently touched. As I start to type ahead, where here you see the word SharePoint, it's going to start to then refine based on that current work history, a filter on people and content. And also in Delve, we have the concept of boards, so you'll see results of boards as well. Then when I click here or hit return, by either hitting the arrow or clicking return, I'm actually going to be taken to our new search results page, which is the part that I think we will normalize through more and more search boxes. So I think there will still be that value of, in context of where I'm working, I'm looking for something that's of that similar type. But as I commit to a more broad search, I will be taken to this new search results experience to then show me relevant people based on what I'm looking for, relevant documents. In SharePoint, we add today the concept of relevant sites. And more, we think this search results page will grow up and mature so that it can start to become a de facto experience no matter which text box you search from. But still, I click into the text box and I get the context of where I'm working, commit to a full search results, and I'm taken to the new search results. I think the other question that probably comes up, and I believe was submitted, was what if we built our search center and highly customized it, and that still exists, and we want still people to be able to get to our way of programming against search. And that, of course, doesn't go away. And in fact, if you do a search today, which is sort of half-answer question, in SharePoint Home, today when you do a search and you get to the search results page, there's a little button at the bottom that says, take me to my enterprise search. And that really is one way to get to your enterprise search center. Everything you do there in a custom look and feel, scoping, certainly is intact and can be led from a click into the text box to find recent, go to the initial search results page, which is based on intelligence, to then commit to a full enterprise search. And if by the time you haven't found what you're looking for, of course, then it leads into that really broad enterprise-wide search. But more and more, what's underneath our new search results page, which is based on the graph, is the value of a full enterprise search. It's just filtered down to what's most relevant to you. So definitely you will see us rationalize a more common experience when people are searching in Office 365. but we do have multiple entry points that each have today a unique experience based on what it is that people are doing there.
Thank you. This is great. One step going further.
Yep.
Can you share some information with us about what the plans are for adding more content sources to the graph, like Sway, Teams, Power BI?
Yeah, we get a lot of questions around, what is the graph aware of? And so there is a great article that I can follow up with that basically says what does the graph know about? It knows about people, it knows about documents, it knows about documents stored in different locations. And as more and more of these user experiences, and you mentioned Teams and Yammer, more and more of those are actually coming into the fold of the same environment that we're already aware of. So there's one pivot where you look at what is actually coming into the graph, or what is becoming aware of the concept of Office 365 groups. So as you start to move more and more into this realm of where content is already aware of, you're putting more and more content into the places that we're already programming against. Now when it gets to things like Sway, or it gets to things as new as the actual chat in Teams, those are elements that are certainly on the bubble for us to be able to program against. And I think it's just a matter of time. The team's got a pretty decent backlog of where they're going next. The two things that they most recently added was, I think I mentioned, the concept of if I put a file in a Office 365 groups files location, for us that's just SharePoint Online, and the graph is now aware of it as of just a couple of weeks ago. The other thing is, as you start to attach documents in a modern way, you really are linking to the file of where it's located. And so, of course, we already know where the content is because this search index is always crawling OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, and other repositories. But now we have the awareness in the graph that now this is an entity that was attached to an email, and that email might have gone to a group. So the graph is tracking what we already know in the index, but it's also tracking that modern document from an attachment perspective because it's been shared with the group. Just because it's been shared within a new way, before we program the graph to be aware of modern attachments, we didn't get those signals that were coming from attachments in email. And so now we have them. And so the team really is just moving on to those next set of signals. There's some big ones coming. There's certainly some ones that people have been asking for. There's also some information that, based on, other sources of information that we now have at our fingertips that you'll see us make announcements on and really make some of these people experiences and the people card much more aware of the full breadth of who is this person, what can I learn about them, and of course then we program how does that then bubble through. Some things I can't yet talk about, but really exciting stuff in the pipeline. And of course we know a lot of where people are wanting to put content and how they're wanting to then chat and share about that, and we want that to be all in the realm of what the graph is aware of to be able to provide more and more intelligence right straight through to the user.
Thank you. There is a question. There is many related questions. Two of them are, is there a way to add custom sources to the graph?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we came out with Delve about 2.5 years ago, there was a concept that, of course, we were going to enable extensibility. And that's really, if you go to graph.microsoft.com, there is a great website that talks all about the graph and how you can develop against it. And initially we talked about being able to both pull out of the graph and push signals into the graph. The team started to break out the work, and we really needed to hone down so that all of the experiences that we were building were fast, were relevant, were fresh, and a lot of the work to rationalize across all the signals that we were providing to the graph really was a decent amount of work. And so the team really separated the pull and the push into two different phases. I don't have a specific time to talk about how you can push signals in, but absolutely today, whether it's us building these new experiences or custom developers being able to pull out of the graph API is a public API, and there's a number of ways that people can build their own experiences. But you're right, it's not yet able to push in custom sources. And one of the things that we demoed to give a sense of what does that mean, we did give a demo both with our CRM and Salesforce to be able to take those additional content repositories, very customer focused, and to then push those through into the graph. and we showed a really early look at what would that look like in Delve, where there might be a Salesforce or an SAP or a CRM type card, and to be able to customize the card and push that into the graph. So it is still top of mind. I believe it is something that the team is still committed to, but it's not something that we're talking about just yet in this early part of 2016, and hopefully have more to share later part of the year.
Okay, the next one is still related to the graph.
Okay.
What happens with privacy? Let's say adding a report document into an HR for leave or posting for a new position or a complaint. If the document is open for everyone, it will show I went into those document forms. What if I don't want my boss or colleagues to know what I have been looking or working into?
It's a great question, and I'll just bring this up just as sort of in the backdrop to read through sort of the general points. But I think the question really centers on, can people see what I'm viewing? Because as a participant in the graph, that is certainly one action that we track. But you won't have exposure of content just based on a view, and it won't ever say, Mark viewed this document. What will happen is after, I believe the threshold is 10 or 12 views on a piece of content, you will get the context of that piece of content is trending, but there won't be exposure of X, Y, and Z person viewed that content. But again, if you take an action of being able to modify it, or you take an action to be able to share it, those are pretty explicit items that we track, so that from a security perspective, you actually could do an audit trail to know who last modified this document, who has access to that. But there are a lot of things that we don't expose through just to say that Mark may never care about this document, but boy, he has access to it, and that's something we want to share. That's not the way that the graph or the way that our experiences work. So if you viewed something, your manager is not going to be notified that you viewed it, and they won't see it in their Delve feed. That's not how it's programmed against. But if you look at some of the generic ways that we try to promote how secure and how private the environment is, if I have a document that I don't want anybody to see, I of course can set that as permissions to have me and me alone access that, which means it won't flow into the graph, it won't appear in a custom portal application that somebody built, it won't come through on a mobile device because I haven't shared it with anybody, I haven't given permissions, meaning it won't be available or visible to anybody else. And if I create a zone that's a folder that is only accessible to me, anything I put in there will never come into anybody else's view. And there's even a step further that we've got an article out there, is if I want to explicitly say on a metadata of a file, I can say don't share with graph, and that will mean it's in the search index, but it won't participate in the graph. So even if you've shared it out, or it's in an environment to be where it could have been shared out, but this particular document you don't want it to be shared, you can say basically don't share with graph, and it won't. And that's something you have to configure, but it is a step that you can take.
Yes, and we also have a related question to this. Can I exclude the whole site collection from appearing in the graph?
So excluding a whole site collection from a graph perspective would be something you couldn't explicitly do. But what you can do certainly is you can set permissions on the site collection, meaning if you create, let's just say extreme example, I create a site collection for me and me alone, and that's my working environment. It's kind of like OneDrive for Business. If I never share from there, nobody will ever see that. And OneDrive for Business is a private site collection, is one way to think. It technically is one way to think about it. So if I have a site collection, and let's say my really close team of 5 to 10 people have been invited and are all members of that site collection. Within that site collection, within that sphere of people, only the content that's in there, only we would have access to. And so you can certainly control permissions, and it will be adhered to for sure at the graph level. So there would be no exposure of that content outside of that. And of course, you can set even further permissions if you wanted to wrap something with digital rights management or use the RMS service. You could do that on a document library, and of course that's going to even further lock that content down. And of course there's rules that you can set if you're leveraging data loss prevention with DLP and SharePoint Online or SharePoint On-Prem. From a compliance perspective, you can then further lock down and further control the awareness of the behavior of how that content should or should not be used. So there's a lot of measures that you can take, but there isn't a mechanism today that says this particular site collection, opt it all out of the graph. But certainly permissions would be intact for any content that lives inside of that site collection.
All right, I have a feeling that for each question you answer, we get 5 more. So we could stay here for hours, but we are just running out of time. So I'm trying to normalize those questions. But for everyone, I'm going to make sure that each of those questions get answered.
Yep, I can stay on as well, and I'll answer if people want to just not log off immediately. We'll sign off, and you can sort of turn your attention and maybe check back in about 5 or 10 minutes. But we'll try to certainly address them, or at least notify you that they were addressed, and we'll reference it back into the recording when we post that later. And I just want to let everybody know there's a lot of resources. I know that Agnes has another set of resources that we should show. But if you're going to looking for more information, obviously about Office 365 or anything specific to Delve or where we might be publishing, there's a lot of information on the blog. There's a lot of direct information about different topics that you might be interested in that are related to intelligence if you want to go explore more. And I always love to let people know if you have a piece of feedback, whether it was based on a question you asked here or as you start to use and leverage more search and discovery, if you have a feature or a functionality that you're interested in, definitely go to office365.uservoice.com and either find that same suggestion somebody else made and vote it up, or add it to the list, because it's a very active environment for our engineering team, and they're always interested in the different features and functionality, or maybe the next level thing that will get you to actually use the content. It's not quite there for you yet, but if it had this feature or if it did X or Y, and we'd love to know that. We definitely think you should try it. There's lots of ways to spin up a trial and experience it, and there's a lot of ways to engage with folks like Agnes that will help you walk through maybe the depths that are very specific to your enterprise. So don't miss out on those in-person actions as well. Agnes, anything you want to share or show up? I can stop sharing from a link perspective. Do you have
I'm going to share in the very end, but before that I would like to ask you to answer some more questions.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. The next questions are about will I ever be able to control the graph, or will it be possible to define custom policies tied to rules that govern how the graph behaves?
Yeah, so working directly with the graph is not something that we have in the short term in terms of today how you can program against the search index. But if you take that as you can program against the search index, that might be that you're building a custom application because you want to expose a certain set of information in a very intelligent way in an environment that supports that customization. That could be a SharePoint team site. It could be a custom application that you built in a mobile way. At that level, you can, of course, very much control what it is that comes through. There's a lot of great documentation on how you can leverage the API that goes first all the way down to the content itself, and as its results that are returned in whatever it is you queried, you can then tune down and tune up what it is that you want to show based on the relevancy, based on content type, order, and there's a lot of things that you can program against. There are, of course, a lot of things that we program against and adjust based on feedback. But at the level of programming your search results is really the level that you have still access, whether that's at the custom approach that you've taken on the enterprise search, or the way that you're binding and managing permissions. That really dictates a lot of who sees what and how does that come across, and really indirectly programs the graph. So to be frank, I don't have a great answer in terms of being able to showcase how you can go in and tweak and tune the graph from an IT configuration perspective. There's a lot of things that we do, and there's a lot of feedback that we take and adjust over time to make it the most relevant, the most performant, the most productivity gaining type offering that we can. But certainly we get a lot of feedback around what's the extensibility. We think we've got a good development model for extensibility through the API, and I think it is something that we need to start to review more on how can we provide ways that people can configure more in the user interface, either as IT on behalf of everybody or as individuals to be able to tune, here's actually what I want to see. I want to make the graph even smarter because I want to influence it in ways that I can explicitly say. So it's great feedback. I think there's a number of dials and things that you can do to tune things through development or through just how you use or set permissions. But I think there's that next level of things that we can review, and would love to hear more if people submit more information or more suggestions on how they'd like to control the graph.
Okay, we've got a very interesting question.
All right.
As you told, everything is recorded, such as number of views, popular document viewed, etc.
Mm-hmm.
In case if any particular document which listed on the top popular was deleted accidentally. In case if we restore it from the recycle bin, will the metadata, such as total count, popularity, etc., will be retained, or the count will start from the scratch?
That is one I might have to, if you send me email, I'm not too hard to find. I think I might have to ask that question just so that I don't get the question wrong. I understand when you delete it, it's certainly recoverable, so all the information is there in terms of the metadata, title, description, anything around ownership is restored. But I really would have to look to see if anything from a view count. I don't think that it does get deleted until it's ultimately pushed out of the system entirely, which means first it goes into the first recycle bin, which is accessible to the user to recover. Then after 90 days, it goes into a second recycle bin, which an IT administrator of that site collection can restore. And then ultimately, if it doesn't get recovered, it would then be flushed out of the system. I think it's at that point, after those 90 days and then 30 days in the second recycle bin, that if you were to recover it, it would maintain some of that information. And in the graph, just to add another element, and again, without answering it 100% accurately, the graph is a set of information over 90 days. And so the question I'd have to ask is, if something gets put into a recycle bin or is deleted, does the graph automatically lose awareness of it and then no longer track it? And then when it picks it back up, when it becomes recovered, does that start fresh? I don't know the answer to that. But if you follow up with me, if you know my Twitter handle, it's MKASHMAN, and then just put another @ symbol at Microsoft.com. So mcashman at Microsoft.com, and I'll certainly track that one down.
Yes, that's great. The next one is, do I understand correctly that Dev won't show all the documents and that it takes people acting on that document for it to show up? Does that mean we keep using the traditional search center for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question because it really is just a what is Delve and what am I seeing when I click into Delve. But certainly it is going to be a feed of content that's active around you. So if people had modified it, if you had shared it with somebody and they made an edit, of course that's going to be a part of that feed. It'll also derive off of if somebody who is in your realm of social sphere, but maybe you have no direct connection to where they create something. And I'll give an example. If a colleague of mine that by nature of the graph, I'm connected to maybe 2 or 3 people away, sort of like the Kevin Bacon of the enterprise. So 6 degrees of separation. Through Kevin Bacon, I know Molly, who works on the East Coast, but I don't really interact with her a ton from a content perspective. But Molly uploads a new video into a channel that maybe I have no awareness of and not connected to. But because I'm connected to Molly, that video would come through my feed and really has no connection to anything that I modified or anything that I created. But because she created, that's another example of what comes through Delve. So I'm seeing things that not always am I directly involved with. I'm seeing people and what they're doing that are connected to me, and that is different from the Search Center. In the Search Center, what I start with is basically type in a keyword or a key phrase and commit to a search. And when it does that, it's going to crawl the entire index and give me results back. But based on that keyword, I may never have come across Molly's video because it had nothing to do with the keyword that I input. The search would be aware of it if I typed in exactly the title of or something that was in the title of that video, but I might have no concept of the topic. I might have no concept of what was recorded and when it was uploaded. But because through Molly, I can learn, because I know her, I can learn what she's working on, things that she's included into the system, and that would come through. And that really defines Delve across new pages or news that people are creating in team sites. Things that people are attaching in a group email that I may not have looked at in my email because it may be just something that was referenced like, hey, FYI. But as it starts to trend and lots of people are viewing that content in the Delve interface, the intelligent interface, I will see that bubbled up because now a lot of people are reviewing it, and what I didn't maybe see as a signal in my inbox to view it, I'm now seeing as a signal in Delve of, wow, actually a lot of people are finding value and maybe it's something that I should look at. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what and how Delve works, but it definitely is different than going and typing in a search keyword in a search center. Both have value, don't get me wrong. One is more of a discovery engine and I'm seeing things happening around me. One is more of I'm going to look for something explicitly and I know what I'm looking for and I'm going to find it.
That's great. I think we've got one more very interesting question,
Okay. Shoot.
Which goes into a quite different direction. The question is, do my query rules in SharePoint Online affect modern search results, for example, X-rank?
Including extranet?
X-rank.
Oh, so you might be a little bit out of my comfort zone here as well in terms of the depths of programming, but I think what I'm understanding the question is if I were to build some logic and smarts into my search center or based on search, maybe in a content by search web part, would I be able to leverage that? And I think I'll cheat and give you sort of one thing you didn't ask and I think an answer to what was asked. But as you program your search center, I believe today the answer is it is not controlling the modern experience. Modern experience being today we've released into Delve a new search experience that isn't yet aware of those rules that you set. It currently is aware of the rules that we've set through the graph, meaning the algorithm that's giving you a most relevant behavior, but it doesn't go through a second filter of a way that you've programmed. But if you think about it, we'd also like to bring the ability of you being able to program explicitly specific rules into your search experiences and layer on top of that additional intelligence. So this is the part of the question I'm answering, not answering your question, but hopefully providing related context. So a lot of people have been asking, when I perform and write against the search index, can I add the logic of the graph in between? And the answer is absolutely yes. And that's effectively just programming through the graph API. So if you've built some smart logic into your search experience, we want to listen as feedback is what I'm hearing you to be able to then have that applied to the layers of experience that we build, but also awareness that you can bring in the value of relevancy on top of those search experiences that you're building, which effectively I think give you the power to build your own custom intelligent experiences. So another point of feedback that I will take, and I think another one that if I didn't do it justice, please follow up with me and I will ask the folks that are behind and smarter than I in some of these environments. But I'm always available again, mcashman@microsoft.com. I'd love to follow up on that one.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. Apparently there are many repeating questions still coming.
Okay.
But I just would like to wrap up now. Everyone, I really would like to say thank you for attending this webinar today. As I have mentioned, please check your inbox later this week for the recording URL and also for some follow-up information from Mark and myself. Mark, I would like to say a huge thank you for you as well. This content has been very exciting and very intelligent, and you can see we are still getting a lot of questions. The very last thing I would like to share before we leave is I am lost. I have two screens and I am lost.
Sounds good. Well, as you're looking for those, I just want to say a thank you to you, Agnes, for having me on. I think it's a great experience, obviously, to be able to share through your programs. And certainly with your expertise, I appreciate you, helping me get to today with reviewing content and giving me some feedback. And then, of course, sharing today. I also will, just in a couple minutes here after reviewing questions, I'll put a link out to the deck if people want to review that again. And I know that we'll probably include that as a link in the summary for when it's on demand. But thank you for your time today. And of course, your interest in Office 365 and what Microsoft is doing with the Microsoft Graph. And we hope that you also experience these intelligent experiences, get a lot of productive value out of them, but also make sure that you give us great feedback so that we can grow the service over time to really adapt to the value that you see. And when you go to search and discover content, that it is the exact content that you were looking for without having you to spend a lot of time doing too much searching. But thanks for your time today, and again, thanks, Agnes, for having me on.
Thank you, Mark. And the last thing is what I would like to mention today is that I am doing an on-site workshop in Amsterdam in less than 2 weeks from now. And if you are interested in, it's going to be about SharePoint 2016 and Office 365 search and discovery and intelligent insight in Office 365. If you are interested, please register as soon as possible because we only have left only a few more seats. If you use the code webinar, you can get 20% off. I really hope to see some of you there. And once again, Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and insights today. And thank you, everyone. Have a very good day or night. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.